How did McLaren manage to win in Miami? It's been long coming for Lando Norris. He has missed a lot of opportunities to win a race. Now, coming to Miami was a different track for them, but looking at how they have performed before coming to Miami, you would have known that McLaren had been on their game. The first team to bring upgrades were the Red Bull, and they said they'll bring upgrades that will make the car go podless. Unfortunately, in Japan, they brought upgrades, but the car did not go podless. Now, looking at the upgrades they've brought, for me, I noticed the car did not really improve. The Red Bull didn't move forward even with the upgrades they brought. So the Red Bull were still like stagnant around the same place where they are. While other teams like Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, Aston Martin were tuning up their car because they are still the ones learning. These teams are still the ones learning, trying to bring up a car that will compete or be on par with Red Bull. But Red Bull is the pinnacle of success and best aerodynamical car recently. So these teams are really putting their structures, energy, manpower together to get their car in the best position for them to compete. So McLaren has been doing a good job, but let's fast track back to China. McLaren was very fast in China. If you look at the China wet, that is for the sprint qualifying, they were so fast. During the sprint race, they were fast. But during the main race, they were very fast. At a point, they were on par with the Ferrari, which was the second best team, or had been the second best team this season. They've been really bringing it out to show that they can do, not just only do, they can also compete with Red Bull, but they've not had the channel. Now, fast track back to last year also when they brought upgrades, even to Silverstone, they were so fast. They were closely on par with Red Bull in Silverstone. And since they've brought upgrade from the middle of season last year, they've been so fast and they've been learning. So the curve of their learning had gone on a high trajectory. Coming to Miami, bringing 10 upgrades to the car, which had shown its performance altitude. The 10 upgrades really shoot the car upward, and in balance, in consistency, on long run pace, they were there. In qualifying, they were not really there. They were up and down in qualifying, but during their long run pace, they were there, but they didn't show their hand so that people would not know. But for the data we were seeing, we saw that these guys are not to be joked with. They were really showing that they can give it up. Now, a good race panned out good. But how did Lando win? They've got a fast car. They needed the right strategy. When you have a fast car, a good engine, you need a good strategy to win. Now, they started 5th and 6th, but they know that they can be on the same par with Red Bull in their race pace because of the upgrades. Ferrari have not brought any upgrades in recent time. They've only been bringing track-suited upgrades to make their car suit the track. Their first upgrade will be coming in Imola. They were meant to bring upgrades in China, but they didn't bring. They said they'll bring some in Miami, they didn't bring. Now, they can see the trajectory that McLaren had gone. McLaren had closed up to them and is ahead of them, so they need to bring upgrades in Imola. So with the upgrades that McLaren had brought, it had changed their perspective of the way the game is. Though they've not gotten their setups right, but the setup they were able to pull up in Miami was a bang. Was so good that they were competitive. When the race started, the raging bull of Sergio Perez was about taking his own teammate out, or Carlos Sainz, or anybody that is close to him, but they were able to weave him and the rest took him back from third position that he was. Now, Piastri was able to jump from 6th to 3rd, and he was able to chase down Charles Leclerc. He was chasing down Charles Leclerc with consistency. He was not overheating. He was not graining his tire. Ferrari really tried because they didn't grain their tires in that race and they had decent pace, but the McLaren of Piastri was not graining his tires, while Lando Norris, that was racing Perez when Perez fell, was able to race Perez and overtake Perez. One, you need to look at how his race panned out. He was able to chase down Perez, hunt him down, overtake him. He was able to close down on Carlos Sainz, but Carlos Sainz went to change his tires, but he closed him down. He could have overtaken him on track, because at that point in time, Lando Norris was the fastest car on track, which shows the upgrades were working. Fast track taking advantage of the safety car. When the safety car came out, because Magnussen bamboozled Logan Sargent, and Magnussen all through the weekend had been taking penalties as if that is all he needed to survive. He was just on penalties, hugging penalties, loving penalties, point penalties, till he accumulated 10-point penalties, accumulating about 6 points in a weekend. That is disappointing. Now, when that happened, they were on lap 28. At that point, the McLaren had an opportunity to change the tire and jump Max Verstappen to be ahead of him because they were leading the race. Changing tire at that point will save them a lot of time, and they will also be able to be ahead. So they changed the tire, was ahead. When safety car was going in, because of the inexperience, he was unable to depressurize himself from Max Verstappen that was putting pressure on him. The pressure was so much, but he was able to depressurize himself and took his car quite beautifully well, and he drove with his focus and his senses right intact. Normally, Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen would have gotten to the start-stop straight before they move, because they know you cannot overtake them before the start line to be a penalty. So he had already taken off before that point, which could have caused him an opportunity to lose at that point. But you will know at that point that the car was fast, so he was able to get the first turning, the second turning, and he was ahead. And from that point, Max Verstappen could not catch up, and that is how he was able to finish and end his drought of winless races. And that alone shows at the end of the race they were able to get about 7.8 seconds ahead of the Red Bull. But the Red Bull during the race for 22 laps was able to manage 3.5 seconds. That's about times 2 of what Red Bull was able to manage. And normally Red Bull would have pulled up a Bugatti and just ahead. But it shows that the McLaren has improved, but the Red Bull had really struggled on that track. And what is next for McLaren? They need to bring more upgrades so that they can be competitive. Number one thing is put Red Bull under pressure, they will fall. Put them under pressure and pressure, like 2 teams or 3 teams putting them under pressure, they will collapse. And where McLaren are presently, they have put them under pressure, and it has shown that Red Bull might not really be able to hold that pressure. Red Bull won't come into the next race trying to race McLaren or destroy every other team like they did after Singapore in Japan last year and after Australia in Japan this year. But I know this one will be different, because these teams have learned, the Ferrari have learned, the McLaren have learned. They want to pull up a big race and not anything surprise them, and at the end of the day they will lose out. And I am sure these teams will come up ready to race and to give Red Bull a big treat that will surprise them. Certainly Ferrari are bringing upgrades and they have 2 weeks to learn. Red Bull will also have setups to learn from and to make their car better. So it's going to be a whole vibe from Imola downwards. Mercedes have still promised they are bringing their own upgrade, but I'm sure no matter what upgrades Mercedes are bringing, there are no race wins for them this year. That one is almost constant, because they've not really showed that they can pull a hand or do something incredible. But for McLaren and Ferrari, it shows that they are doing a good job. And McLaren especially coming to Miami to win a race after a long drought, that is a good race for them, and that is good development. And doing it in the Mercedes engine as a Mercedes customer is quite impressive. And I hope and I know that they are going to do more this year, win more races, and more success to them. And Piastri too should be able to win a race this year. Catch us in our next video on how the upgrades work and what happened to Red Bull in Miami and some other videos. I love you guys. Bye. Thanks. Chi.